Joining us now, Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Democrat Justin Fairfax, also an announced candidate for governor. Complete disclosure, we have predicted Justin Fairfax is going to be the 2021 Democratic nominee for governor, and he's with us now. Justin, great to have you with us, sir.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you as always, and hello to all your listeners and to all Virginians. Wonderful to be with you.
Okay, got a lot to talk about today. Let's start with the state Senate that you're presiding over. Unlike the House, the state Senate has decided under the Godfather, Dick Saslaw, the Senate Majority Leader, Democrat from Fairfax, to stay in session in person, have media coverage there. You're at the Science Museum. There's plenty of social distancing and masks. The House, though, decided to leave and go electronic. Why did you guys decide to stay?
You know, we are, again, as you mentioned, at the Science Museum. We were there back in April for an earlier reconvened session, and I'm presiding over the Senate as I normally do as Lieutenant Governor. And, you know, we found that it was safe for us to do it in the way that we did it back in April. As you mentioned, there's plenty of social distancing. We all have, our masks on. We're washing our hands and sanitizing. So we're observing all the precautions that you need to preserve, and we have the space to do it safely. So we're being very efficient. You know, we're getting the people's business done. That's why they sent us there, and dealing with some very critical issues right now for the Commonwealth around the budget, dealing with the economic difficulties that the entire country is facing. But Virginia is doing a much better job of handling this than other states are. With COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing efforts there, I think we've been very effective in our response. And then, of course, with criminal justice reform and policing reform, this is really a very urgent issue. We passed landmark legislation just the other day on a committee, and I look forward to it coming to the Senate. And I'm ready and able, as you know, John, to cast tie-breaking votes as I've done for the last 2 years on critical issues, including Medicaid expansion, gun violence prevention, women's reproductive health care. I've cast some really consequential tie-breaking votes, and am ready to do so on policing and criminal justice reform, if it comes to that.
Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax with us on the John Fredericks Show. Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, you mentioned justice reform. What are the top pieces of legislation that you're favoring that you would like to see passed in this special session on justice reform?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, John, some of the really key items that were passed out of committee and that I believe will be signed into law by Governor Northam. One are, banning chokeholds, which we saw, of course, in Minneapolis. George Floyd, an officer with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, killed him in cold blood in front of the world. And that sparked so much of the change that we have seen now worldwide. So that is critical that we do that throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, banning those chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants. We saw Breonna Taylor was killed in Louisville, Kentucky, as a result of that policy. And then, of course, tracking officers who have used, unjustified uses of force, excessive force, making sure that they can be decertified and not simply moved from law enforcement agency to law enforcement agency. And I should say, John, there's a lot of support for this, of course, among the community, among activists, but also among law enforcement. And I have, met with law enforcement personally. We talked through a lot of these issues, and they understand that, here in Virginia, they want to uphold the highest standards and want to make sure that we are, not having, really, bad officers, make it more difficult and ruin the reputations of, so many good officers and so many good departments. And so, it's critical that we make these reforms, that we're transparent. And I think that we've also got to go even further than just those policing reforms, John. We've got to reform our criminal justice system here in Virginia. So Senator Joe Morrissey is carrying a very consequential bill around sentencing reform in Virginia, which will allow defendants to opt for a jury trial, but also to have a judge sentence them. Right now, juries do the sentencing phase recommendations in Virginia, and we're one of only about 6 states that still does that. And that usually results in harsher sentences for people and presents a sort of an inequity in our system. And so you're looking forward to that bill coming to the floor. Senator Luis Lucas, again, carrying some significant policing reforms, and have been very supportive of those. And I think once we're done with this, we've got to look at other things. I believe we should abolish the death penalty in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I think it's past time. There are racial disparities and injustices, and I just think it's the right thing to do. I think we need what are called, John, conviction integrity units. These are units that have been started in states and cities around the country, and what they have found is that there are numerous people who have been wrongfully accused, wrongfully convicted, many of whom have spent, decades in prison, only to find out that they were actually innocent of the charges and should never have been accused, convicted, and prosecuted in the first place. And for instance, in Philadelphia, you've had over a dozen people who have been exonerated, who were falsely accused and falsely convicted. And I think we need to have that in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I'm going to be pushing heavily for that, for the implementation of conviction integrity units. So there are other reforms that we need to put in place, but we've got to be focused on justice and fairness. And Senator Mamie Locke made a powerful speech yesterday on the floor of the Senate talking about the need for justice and fairness, and I'm going to continue to be a champion for that.
Well, look, I just want to point out to our audience, Justin Fairfax, Lieutenant Governor, that what's happening now, when you talk about criminal justice reform, people immediately go to the extremes, and they're thinking about what's going on in Fairfax right now with Commonwealth's Attorney Descano there, where they're not prosecuting people for indecent exposure. I mean, they go to the extremes. Nothing that you mentioned here is extreme. In fact, I back all of it, and I'm Trump delegation chairman in Virginia. I can't believe in today's day and age that Virginia still has a jury determining sentencing. That's why you have a judicial system. That's why you have a judge. They have to take a more broader view. Also, a judge is made aware of things that a jury isn't. So I am 100% in favor of that. Senator Bill Stanley, one of the most conservative senators you're going to find in Southside Republican, he's in favor of that. I've been in favor of abolishing the death penalty forever because, Justin, I'm pro-life. So either you're pro-life or you're not. I don't see how you can make a distinction. So I'm just not in favor of it, and I've been in favor of abolishing that forever. And I'm also in favor of your integrity.
The conviction integrity unit.
The conviction integrity unit, because, look, if you're Michael Flynn, you're in favor of that, okay? This works on both sides. If you're Ted Stevens, you're in favor of this. I mean, so many people have been convicted with wrongful evidence, and so why anybody would be opposed to that, I don't know why you would be opposed to that at all. So I favor all of those. Let's get back to, though, reform in blue, policing reform. You want to ban chokeholds. I think you probably get a majority of people that saw the George Floyd thing. That kind of makes sense. There was also an incident, I think, in New York City or Staten Island where somebody had stolen cigarettes. Yeah, I mean, those have to go. What was the other thing you mentioned?
John, so I also mentioned banning what are called no-knock warrants. So these are warrants that are often executed, on a home against a suspected offender, usually at night, and so it's police, breaking down someone's door without announcing themselves, and that often leads to very violent and volatile situations that can and should be avoided. And Breonna Taylor is the most recent example of the tragedy that can happen when that goes wrong. She's an innocent EMT, who's working on the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Try to help us all get through this in Louisville, Kentucky, and yet police, do a no-knock warrant at her house, end up firing shots to kill her, and there's still injustice ongoing there. No one's been truly held accountable for that. And so that we believe has to stop. It puts, obviously, people and citizens in danger and risk, but it also puts police in danger and risk. And I think that has got to change. We talked about decertification procedures, enhancing them so that if an officer is, again, substantiated to have used excessive force, or if there's an investigation into excessive force, and they, resign, for instance, to avoid any accountability, they can't just simply move from city to city, county to county, and do that same kind of policing in the next community. And then, of course, a way to track that statewide, creating a database, which we think is really important. Civilian review boards that have the appropriate, power and authority to help a community investigate these types of issues when they happen, excessive uses of force. It creates transparency and trust in the community. And then we talk about, also what's called a Marcus David Peters alert, which is when someone is having a mental health issue, that we're sending, mental health professionals to respond rather than responding solely with guns. And we see the tragedy that happens when that occurs. So these, again, John, as you mentioned, there's so much common ground here.
There's total common ground.
And working on both sides of the aisle. I talked with the Senator Stanley yesterday. I, of course, talked with many of the leaders on this police reform, and we can get this done, John. We've got to focus on justice and fairness. That benefits, as you mentioned, everybody. All 8.5 million Virginians want more justice and more fairness because it impacts us all, our families, and our communities. And so it's time for us to get that done, and I look forward to helping to lead the Senate to make it happen.
Well, see, this is the whole thing. Instead of talking about defunding police and reimagining police and not having cops like they're doing in Minneapolis or Minnesota, wherever they're doing, or riots in Oregon, what you guys are doing is common sense police reform. Banning chokeholds makes sense. Getting rid of no-knock warrants. Didn't we fight a revolutionary war over that, as I recall?
Right.
I think we did, right? I remember when I was with the Daily Press in Newport News, the Tribune Company, we had an incident where police came in and they were suspected of maybe selling his medication to somebody. He's an older guy, no-knock warrant. They busted in his house in the middle of the night. He was older. He got he thought he was getting robbed. He got his firearm and came downstairs with a firearm. They shot him. I mean, these are the things that happen.
Outrageous.
This makes no sense whatsoever. Those have to go. So there's a lot of common ground here, Justin. No doubt.
Absolutely, John, and I look forward to us all working together. And again, we also got to focus on universal training standards around the state. Again, I have talked with activists and with law enforcement who are very much in support of this and want to work together on this. So everyone's trained and certified at a certain level, which benefits all of us. And pattern and practice investigations for departments that engage in persistent conduct. We see this at the federal level, and we want to have this at the state level. So again, this rising tide lifts all boats around the Commonwealth, and justice and fairness, increasing that benefits us all. And John, I've always been a huge proponent of due process. I was both a federal prosecutor and a defense attorney. We've got to keep our people safe in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we've also got to uphold the law and people's constitutional rights and their due process rights so that they're treated fairly. It makes us stronger as a Commonwealth, and I'm going to keep fighting to make sure it happens.
All right, let me read you a text here from Jeremy in Chesapeake. He says, could you ask the Lieutenant Governor, what do you define as excessive force? Better define it now than otherwise a matter of opinion, and who's going to pay for the training?
Let me take those in reverse. When it comes to the training, obviously we are prepared to provide resources to localities for any increased costs they have with regards to the training. But as I said, I have met with leaders in law enforcement statewide who focus on training standards, and they are enthusiastically in support of increased training and uniform standardized training. So they say we want this accountability. This is important for us because it increases trust and transparency. We avoid, many of these situations that you're seeing now around the country where people are not properly trained and therefore these tragedies occur. And so, we'll make sure to do our part at the state level, but they want this training and this accountability in law enforcement at the local level. And then when you talk about excessive use of force, I mean, this is something that has been defined and adjudicated, in the courts primarily. It's going to vary from situation to situation. But what we all could agree on is that what was done to George Floyd was beyond excessive force. It was, the intentional murdering of a human being. And we know that because it happened on camera in front of our eyes with an officer's knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. With the law enforcement leaders I talked to in Virginia, universally have said that is not policing. That is not proper use of force. That is murder. And I was proud of our law enforcement for standing up and saying that with one voice rather than being silent, because it does increase trust and transparency in the community. So, again, it's going to vary from situation to situation, but, we've seen so many instances, whether it's in South Carolina, where a gentleman was shot in his back when he's running away and was killed. Walter Scott, I believe is his name. Breonna Taylor. You see it in the civilian context with Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot and killed, hunted down the streets of Georgia. Was a former law enforcement officer in that case, and they've been charged. The list goes on and on and on, and we want that list to stop, with hashtags to stop. We want to make sure that folks are treated fairly, are protected, and that we have law enforcement operating on a universal standards and increased training so that we're all safer, we're all more secure, and our Commonwealth gets stronger with more justice and more fairness as a result.
John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Justin Fairfax. He's a Democrat. He provides over the Senate. 2119 Democrats have control. Often he'll break ties. Can't do it, though, on budgetary matters, but everything else he can do it on. And he's also a candidate for governor in 2021, and I predicted that he's going to be the Democratic nominee. And once again, my prediction early is going to be right. Justin, let me just ask you this. I always have this stuff, Justin, right. Let me get to a question here from Eric in Richmond. We've only got a couple minutes. But, sure. Justin, you and your family live in Northern Virginia, right? So you come down.
Correct.
You come down here. You have to preside over the Senate. You have to stay in a hotel, leave your family. You've maybe been in Richmond, haven't. You go downtown. You see the F word on every single store, plywood all over the place, glass in the streets, everything shut down. A lot of it burned out, a lot of it looted. What is your view of that when you came down and saw it? And Eric in Richmond says, what are you going to do to prevent the destruction of Richmond in the future?
John, it really is sad and disappointing to see the destruction that you mentioned in Richmond. And yes, when I come to preside over the Senate, we're there in Richmond. Normally, we're in the Capitol. Now, of course, because of COVID, we're at the Science Museum. But I've seen the destruction. I've seen the boarded up, storefronts. I've seen the broken glass, the graffiti, and I think, John, it comes down to, in many cases, a failure of leadership. You may recall that I actually came down to Richmond at the height of some of the tension and unrest. And I went out, into the streets, and I was there, for part of the time with our, law enforcement partners. And so we wanted to, be there and make sure we're showing support that they have, sort of what they need to stay safe. But also I was there with the protesters and the demonstrators and the activists who wanted to make sure that they were able to exercise their constitutional rights and stay safe. And I went to the Lee Monument the day after peaceful protesters were tear gassed in Richmond. And, John, they were tear-gassed even before the curfew fell in Richmond. And it's all on videotape. And you've seen this tape where,
yes,
people, including families, are standing out there in daylight before curfew, doing nothing wrong, nothing violent, simply exercising their right to be heard. And yet they're tear-gassed and threatened. And so I went down that very next day. I stood in the middle of that crowd, and I said, if you're going to tear-gas this group, you're going to have to start by throwing the first tear gas bombs at me, because it's wrong. And that night, that day that I was there, no one was tear gassed. There was, to my knowledge, no violence in the streets. There was no vandalism. And so, John, leadership matters. And we've got to reinforce the fact that people should be able to exercise their constitutional rights, but we've also got to make sure that we are calling for calm, calling for peaceful protest. And one of my heroes, one of all of our heroes that we just laid to rest as a nation, Congressman John Lewis, talked about getting in good trouble. When you see something that's wrong, you have to get in the way. You have to get in good trouble, and he did that, for his entire life. And so, again, this is about policing reform. It's about protecting people's rights and keeping people safe. And so, again, leadership matters. So when I went down there, and put myself in harm's way, I did so because I thought it was important to lead in that moment and not to allow chaos to reign. And so we've seen also around the Commonwealth of Virginia and other cities and localities, you've seen leadership there too. And so you don't see that same kind of vandalism and destruction that you're seeing in Richmond. You don't see that in other cities. So it's not as if it was widespread. So we've got to call for, serious, focused, principled leadership. And certainly in my role as Lieutenant Governor, and in my service to the Commonwealth of Virginia, I'm always going to, be there to lead and to make sure that we keep our people safe and protect their rights. It's got to be something that we are out front about.
Has LeVar Stoney, the mayor, the Democratic mayor there, in your judgment, is this just an example of completely incompetent and failed leadership?
John, I think the people are going to render that judgment at the polls. There's an election, a mayoral election coming up in Richmond this year. But I do think it's pretty obvious that, and I've heard this from many people in Richmond, that they do feel like leadership has failed them. They feel like, the leadership, it gets so distracted. And, John, this is the price that you pay as well for folks who spend all their time playing political games, who are focused on, tearing other politicians down and, trying to get to that next office and the politics of personal destruction. When someone, is so focused on that, they, take their eye off the ball and they don't protect the people they were elected to serve. And so that's really the price you pay for, dirty politics and for silly games. And you're seeing that again. The controversy continues to, happen in Richmond. There's a controversy around the removal of monuments and awarding contracts, and it just goes on and on and on. And so again, I think people, they're tired of that kind of politics. They're tired of politicians who, come on a scene and again attempt to tear other people down, because what happens is you're not building up the people you were elected to serve. And so, we'll see how that all plays out. But I'm going to continue to do, what I have done in representing 8.5 million Virginians, and that's making sure that, people are able to rise economically, prosper, stay safe. And that's why we've gotten the confidence, John, of, people across the spectrum. I have been able to, again, be with the activists, the protesters, and law enforcement at the same time, in the same night, to bring people together to when we go down there to make sure that there is no vandalism, right? But also to make sure that there's no tear gassing. I mean, that's the difference that leadership makes. And leadership is not just a word, John. It is an action. And I've tried to show that in every facet of my service to the Commonwealth of Virginia as Lieutenant Governor. And just one quick note, a friendly amendment to what you said earlier about my being able to break ties. I can't break it on the overall budget, but I can break it on budget amendments. So as we go through the budget, I break ties, and that's how I was able to break the ties to expand Medicaid in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And to date, over 400,000 Virginians, more Virginians now have health insurance because I was able to break those ties in our budgeting session in 2018. So, John, this has been consequential. Pre-pandemic, we had one of the best economies in the entire nation, near record low unemployment, 2.6%, AAA bond rating reaffirmed, because we have managed our budget so well here in Virginia, even through this crisis. We are now, strongly positioned to have a strong rebound in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where cash is king, to make investments in education and public safety and broadband access, and in voting, to make sure that everyone can vote safely and securely here in November. So, we've had these triple crises around the pandemic, around the economic crisis, and around racial injustice and policing and criminal justice reform. But we have, sort of steered this ship, incredibly effectively in dealing with these crises. And I think that's why we're so positioned in Virginia to continue to be a leader in this country in all three of those areas. And we've got to continue to rise. We need leadership. And we don't need the politics of personal destruction. I watched President Obama, last night at the Democratic National Convention sort of call us to the better angels of our nature and say, democracy's at stake, and people get caught up in the meanness and the lies and the conspiracy theories of politics. It's now got to be about the people, and it always should be about the people, and I'm going to continue to fight to make that the case.
Well, so the way I see this playing out, and we have to go, we're way over time. Trump
with you.
Trump is going to win again, which then eliminates.
I disagree, but I hear you. I disagree.
He's going to win again, Justin. He is going to win again, only bigger. Trump's going to win again, which makes it very difficult for any Republican to win Virginia in 2021. So basically, the Democratic nominee for governor is going to be the governor. And as I predicted for some time, you're the one person that's able to bridge the gap between your base, moderates, people that want to do business and prosper, things of that nature. You're also not inhibited to call out the failed leadership of LeVar Stoney and others. That's why I think you're going to be the nominee and likely the next governor of Virginia in 2021. And as you know, Justin, my early political predictions are uncanny, so you can take that one. But Justin
John,
Fairfax,
look,
go ahead. Final
I
word.
want to just say thank you. No, thank you so much, and again, thanks for your leadership and all that you're doing, and look forward to talking to you again and again and again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and you stay focused on the issues, and that's what we love to do here in Virginia. So the best is yet to come. We're going to have some powerful message of uplift to continue to share with the people of Virginia, and we're on the side of 8.5 million Virginians, and it's time for us all to rise together.